All right, I think I'm live. I don't go live on YouTube that often, but we'll see how this goes. All right, looks like we've got something going on here.
I think I'm live. I don't go live on YouTube that often, but we'll see how this goes.
All right, well, welcome everyone to Viewer Questions Answered, or Ask Me Anything, live right here on YouTube. It looks like we've got Let's Talk About Reaper in the chat. What's up, Mike? How have you been? So the way that this is going to work tonight is pretty straightforward. If you have questions, if you have questions, just ask. I will be answering them as best as I can in real time. I also have some pre-submitted questions that I will get to if I can. What's up, Lost April? What's up, Jason Hall? Looks like I am live. Excellent. So with that being said, I'm going to start off with some pre-submitted questions, and then I will jump into the chat periodically and see what's going on. Matt Blackwell, a Mixed Crypt member, is here. Awesome. Obsidian Recordings. Hello, Obsidian Recordings. Oh, great, Mike. I'm glad to hear that it is nice by you. It's actually a really nice day here in Jersey as well, surprisingly. It's not raining for a change, and it's not a million degrees. Hello, Paul Lucas. Yeah, it's been a beautiful day, although unfortunately it's still hot as hell in my house, so I have to have the central air going, but at least it's not 5 billion degrees. Ben, what up, my man, Ben? All right, so it looks like we have some regulars here. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly jump back and forth between your questions live, if you have questions live, and a bunch of pre-submitted questions that I've been meaning to put up on a Viewer Questions Answered pre-recorded video. I've just been so busy this past year that I decided to do it live and just answer the questions live so you guys can ask me questions in real time as well. Hello, Skeptic. Was this a Skeptic? Skexis? Who we are limiters best for bringing a mix forward? Well, what do you mean by forward? Louder? Or do you mean more present? More present. Let me know who we are. What you mean. That can mean multiple things. As far as making them louder, yes and no. I mean, you still have to. Limiters are great, don't get me wrong, but you can easily overdo them and they can destroy your transients on your drums. That's why it's all about subtlety and stacking your processes throughout your mix. That's my take on that. I'm glad to hear, Matt, that the storm did not do much for you down there. Awesome. What up, Metal B? Okay, so while who we are more present, okay, so the biggest areas for me, actually I have a mix pulled up here that I can show you in real time here. Now this is not a metal mix, it's more of a hard rock mix, but I'll show you what I mean. Something I recorded a long time ago, way back in 2007. So for example, the limiter here is really working heavily on my bass guitar. And that's really what's doing the heavy lifting as far as limiting in this mix. I'm not doing hardly any limiting on the master bus at all, and no limiting on the drums as well. These days I would be using clippers and maybe some more saturation, but I was a little more crude with this back in the day. But this is from way back in 2011 where I really got my stuff together and started getting things right at the source and simplifying my approach. But yeah, for me, the biggest takeaway, the places where I use limiters most would be bass guitars to keep the low end in check. Vocals are another one to keep the, lop off any excess transient on vocals. For example, let's see if we got some vocalages here. Steve singing, and I've got a limiter on his voice to keep him in check, and that's really it. So it's not a one quick fix. A lot of people will obsess about limiters on their master bus trying to get their mixes loud, even though that's not really as necessary in today's day and age, and that's not the way to do it in my opinion, but great question. Okay, Alex asks, multiband compression on the master bus, rock and metal. What's your philosophy? What should I be striving for? Control low end, pump, clean low ends. Okay, my approach, man, is that I don't even know if I have any on this particular mix. This is an older mix. I might not have any. Come on, Ozone, you can do it. Yeah, I don't have any, but let me show you what I would do if this were done today to show you my exact approach. There's a setting in C4 that's called Basic Multi. I just messed it up. Reset the gain. For me, that's way too much what you're seeing. Way too much. So I'm going for like a couple dB at most. And for the most part, I don't want to see too much action that's outweighing another area. In other words, like I don't want to see too much going on in the low end or the top end and mid-range. I want it to be relatively uniform. So I know that my mix is not jacked in any one particular frequency band. So I'm looking for like 2 to 3 dB max within each of the frequency bands. Something like this. Now this mix is very balanced, so you're not gonna see crazy stuff happening. If I were like a mastering engineer and someone sent me like a home recorded track by maybe someone that doesn't know how to, balance their low end or something like that, then maybe I'd have to do more work with the multiband. But if I'm mastering my own stuff, I just prefer to get the mix right. That's my philosophy. I know it's a little oversimplified, but it's the truth. So great question. Okay, let's talk about Reaper Assist. I'm curious to see one of your recordings without a bunch of limiting and compression, just to see how hot your tracks typically are when you start versus your. Oh, good stuff. So essentially, hearing some of your raw drum, guitar, and bass tracks without pan and balance. Okay, I don't know if I have any of those here right now, unfortunately. Maybe I'll do that's actually a good video idea. Let me take a screenshot of that. I have a bunch of new content in the works that's very, very different. I'm really excited about it, and that sounds like a good one, man. So, Mike, I'm going to shoot that video just for you. Maybe we can collab on something relating to that. So that's a good one. Unfortunately, I just have this finished mix pulled up right now, and I have to dig through my hard drive and load up a raw multi-track, and it would just take too long during the live stream. But great question. As far as volume, man, to be honest, what you're pretty much going to hear is just tracks that were recorded, not clipping. So, like, you're just gonna, it wouldn't be balanced at all. The recordings themselves are not balanced until I start balancing the faders. Like because we're recording digitally, you could just record at a decent level that's not too hot or too quiet, and then just balance your faders in the mix itself. Now, back in the day when tape hiss was an issue, and when we were limited to track counts as far as like how many tracks were available on the tape machine, then people would sometimes pre-balance on the way in. If you're recording a band live or something like that, but luckily, we don't have to do that anymore. But it's also the negative side to that is people leave everything to the end. So there's a give and take. But for me, I just make sure I just track drums on Sunday. I made sure he wasn't clipping on the way in. The tracks weren't too quiet. I don't care if he's peaking at -2, -12. As long as it's in that range where I'm not gonna have to worry about noise, which is pretty hard to do when you're recording at 24-bit. And it's been that case for 20 years now, over 20 years. That's my philosophy. And then I obviously balance when I actually get to the mix itself. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, Who We Are says, I like to know what you mean when you say in check in terms of your use of limiters. Well, what I mean is they're not overly dynamic. So for example, let's go to this vocal track here. Okay, perfect example. Now I have a bunch of automation on the track because I like to use a lot of automation specifically on vocals, but let me just boost it so you can hear what I mean. Because the limiter is making it sound louder also. Let's go with, I can't just turn up Reaper users could just turn up the track even when there's automation. Pro Tools users, we have to use bootleg approaches like this, like a trim plugin. But so I'm gonna boost this up a little. So right now there's no limiting, who asked that? Who We Are, take a close listen to this vocal track right now. There's no limiting, okay? So it's not in check. See how it just sounds more not polished? It sounds great, but he's singing consistently. That's any vocalist, right? Because remember, vocalists have to compete with friggin' heavy guitars, slamming drums. We need to make them as uniform and as consistent as the guitars are. And the human voice just naturally is not like that. So in the mix, that's our job as mixing engineers. So what I do is use a limiter, and that's actually compressed vocals also. So if I were to take compression off, forget about it. But the limiter just adds that nice little bit of extra control to keep the vocal nice and consistent. And then I still apply automation on top of that to bring out specific words and phrases that I feel are important for the listener to take notice of. Because what a lot of home studio people will do, myself included, is we'll just slap plugins on and then hope that it works. But automation is how you breathe life into your mix. So let's take a listen. So right there, that just made him extra consistent. This is nothing unique to me. If you watch most modern mixers, they're doing some form of limiting and compressing, sometimes more than one compressor on the vocals. And that's what I mean by keeping them in check. Excellent question. All right. Okay, so Luke Traina. It's a cool name, Traina. Luke Traina. Hey, Bobby. In a hard rock metal context, best way to widen low end without losing clarity and or low end to guitars without making them too subby. I don't worry about widening low end, dude. Well, first of all, actually, a lot of guys or girls will actually do the opposite, and they'll monoize their low end to keep their mix nice and clean. So, for example, most of your low end instruments that are below 100 hertz are going to be in the middle anyway. Your kick drum and bass, and if you have any 808s or subdrops, are going to be in the middle. Guitars are not a low frequency instrument in that regard. There's not a whole lot of sub going on guitars. I know I get this question all the time. Even if you're using 8 strings tuned down to X, right, or drop E or whatever, you're still not having a lot going on below 90 hertz. There's not like a bunch of punch into 50 hertz range on guitar. So by default, if you're filtering your mix properly, you don't have to worry about that too much. And you don't want a wide low end because it's actually hard because low end is generally omnidirectional. That's why if you have a home theater set up, you can have one sub and kind of place it anywhere in the room and it doesn't really matter, if that makes sense. So I would not worry about widening low end. That is a non-issue if you want to know the truth. Great question. So my friend Addison says, hey, nice shirt. Where would a person get one of those? Well, dude, you could have got one at the show the other day. Dude, I'm terrible with this. It's been so long that I've been in like an active band at all. I don't know if they're on the website, maybe on Bandcamp. Mike handles all that stuff. But I'll get you one, man. Great question. My man, Jimmy Ganji. Dude, are you Jimmy from Band of Make Believe? I wonder. Oh, no, Jimmy Ganji from Against All. Great to have you here, man. Great to have you. We just played, my band, Voidscape, just played with Against All. Great hardcore band. Been friends with those guys for many, many years. Recorded them many, many times. Great dudes. Fun to hang out with. I've been working with the drummer for, God, almost 20 years now. Mr. Dan Patel. I cannot never pronounce Dan's last name correctly. Dan Pavelchek. From Return of the Blind. All that good stuff. Okay, anyway, let me get back to the questions here. Let's talk about Reaper says, I feel lots of folks struggle with volume at the wrong time, if that makes sense. Stuff will typically be quiet when you start. Dude, yeah, I mean, like that's the thing. Everyone's so obsessed with making their mixes loud that's something that comes later down as you massage your mix, right? So first you get your tracks raw, decently. They're not clipped. You're getting your tones right. The loudness is irrelevant when you're starting, but then as you build your mix, you get your balance, you're dealing with your transients on your drums, adding parallel compression, and then you work on your two bus, and as it unfolds, and as you add automation and do all these things, your mix will become master ready as the process goes along. So when you're tracking, it does not matter at all, as long as you don't clip. A lot of times people will send me DIs, well, back in the day when I would accept these things, I'd get DIs that were clipped, snare drums that were horribly clipped and things like that. And you really have to be careful to not clip on the way in because that's really hard to undo. And it's just better to not do it. It's simple. Just turn your interface volume down and you're pretty much set. Okay. Let's see here. Ben, banking off of the limiting question from who we are, would you limit the same way for a guitar or something on an instrumental track? Dude, my guitar tracks look like this. Now, this is not a brutal metal track by any means. This is a more of like a indie rock kind of thing, sort of. So this is a Marshall that was recorded with an SM57. Literally, my entire guitar chain is this. This is my EQ. I'm just rolling. And this is recorded with the cheapest gear you'll ever find. I'll tell you the exact rig. I was recording through a PreSonus Digimax LT preamp, 8 added into a Digio 2, which was a Firewire cheapo interface, a consumer grade Firewire interface back in the day, into my 2006 MacBook Pro with only 2 gigs of RAM. That was my whole rig for recording this album. And here's my EQ. So you do not need fancy gear to get decent tones. So rolling off all frequencies below 70 hertz, all frequencies above 12K. That's what's going on the individual guitars. And then the only compression I have going on is a little bit of C4, just to control the palm beats. So it's just controlling the chugga-da-chugga-das. Not that there's a lot of chugga-da-chugga-das in this song, and that's it. I rarely will compress guitars. Unless I want a little bit of character and I want them to pump and sound fun for some reason, then I'll smack them with compression. But we have to remember, guitar is already compressed right? They're distorted. Distortion is sort of a form of compression. So you don't have to worry about limiting guitars. I know there are producers out there, really good ones, that they do that, right? And from what I found is they're mainly doing that to control it's the same thing I'm doing. They're just doing it in a broadband sense. My ear likes to hear the more spongy guitar tone. I don't like guitars that sound super duper like smashed like that. That's just my own personal opinion. So that's my take. Okay, let me not, Handsome Dan, Jimmy, Handsome Dan. I wish Dan were on this stream right now. That'd be awesome if he showed up. That'd be cool. Forgive me for drinking this protein shake. I'm starving. It's my dinner tonight. Tadu, dude, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Tadu Kelly. Hey man, cheers from Brazil. Do you add any delay or reverb on metal rhythm guitars? Most of the time, not. I like to keep my stuff nice and dry. Not to say that that's bad. Obviously, for guitar solos, I do, but you're talking about rhythms. No, I do not. That's just me. Like, for example, these guitars are as dry as the Sierra Desert. Oh, no! I just zoomed in on YouTube instead of... Super dry, no delay, no reverb, especially for the brutal heavy stuff I do. No, it's just straight up dry stuff. I experiment now once in a while if it's a band that's a little more not metal. I might experiment with like a room mic or something like that, but I'm not a big fan of reverb on guitars. That's just me. Great question. Okay, Michael Winchester, what's up, man? Have you any thoughts about streaming on Twitch? Dude, I would love to do it. I have so many things going on that to add another thing onto my plate just sounds like a headache, but maybe one day. Isn't Twitch for video games? Maybe it's not anymore. Maybe it's for anything, but it's an idea. I've had people ask me about starting a Discord. I've had people ask me about, obviously, TikTok. I have enough on my plate with YouTube, if I'm being honest, but I'll keep that in mind. Alex, are you still using X50 on your guitars? Great plugin. Dude, I am. Unfortunately, I'm weaning my way off only because there's no way in hell that it's going to be compatible in the near future because he hasn't updated it in like 100 years. Everyone knows I'm a minimalist when it comes to plugins. I've kind of switched over to the STL Tones amp hub. Is that it? And I only use one model, the 5153. That's it. That's all I need. So that's what I've kind of switched to. I still kind of like the X50 more, if I'm being completely honest. Although I use the same IR, so the tone is so similar. It's just the X50 is so lean. I like the tuner in it. I could live, if I had one plugin to use for the rest of my life, it would be the X50 and I'd be happy, but that's just me. Okay, great question. Thank you. Knives to the birds. I never know how much editing is too much. Okay, well, it depends on what you're going for. I have a simple rule of thumb. I'm personally not a fan of overly mechanical sounding music, although that is really hot in certain subgenres of metal, obviously, gent in particular, as long as the instruments are pocketed. So what I mean is, if you look at your guitar tracks and you are pushing against the beat, it is going to sound like crap. I don't care what anyone says. That does not sound right in most cases. So let's say, for example, I'm working with a band right now and they're more old school, great band. Two really good guitar players that are surprisingly both really good at rhythm. Generally, when I work with bands, one guy or girl is the rhythm player and the other one is more of the shredder. In this band, they both can play rhythms very well together. So what I do, I let them just play the song, left side. Okay, now you go right side. And I'll go through while they're sitting there. And if he or she or whatever is ever pushing against the drums, I slide them back. And as long as they're both close to the drums, either dead on or behind, we're golden. If one person is ahead and the other one's behind and ahead, that's when you end up with a mix that just does not sound right. And people that start out, they'll hear that and say, oh, my tone is muddy, but it's not that their tone is muddy. It's that the performance just does not come across like a pro sounding record. And that's the whole thing. The performance, everyone asks me about guitar tone all of the time, but so much of a good tone, and I've said this a million times on the channel, comes down to good performance, picking aggressively, and just paying attention to the actual, the takes. There's a video on my channel. I can't remember what it's called. It's called like something like your guitar tone is not as bad as you think it is, or something like that. A kid sent me his tone. He's like, Bobby, my tone doesn't sound right. When his tone is actually better than mine that I was using. It's just that he wasn't tight, honestly. Like he was not picking aggressively. He was like, his guitars were in mono, and I actually in the video used a worse tone, but the production was well dialed in as far as everything was edited. The drums were dialed in, and to the untrained ear, the tone sounds better, but it's not that the tone is better, it's the performance is better. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, I don't want to miss any of these questions. You guys are asking great questions. Let me take a sip of my protein drink. And knives to the birds. One thing I want to say is there's no such thing as too much editing if the genre calls for it. You know, I've heard records that sound so fake, but that's what deathcore or whatever, pick your genre, that's what that genre calls for. Now, if you try to force that production onto like a thrash band, that's like an 80s style thrash band, they're not going to be happy because that doesn't go with the aesthetic. And I've been guilty of that. You know, like back in the day when I first learned about editing, I would overdo it with every project, and a lot of clients were not happy with me, if I'm being honest. So there you go. Okay. Paul, Lucas, have you ever ran acoustic guitars through amp VSTs? And if so, would you process it differently than electrics? Well, dude, if I'm going to do something like that, it's going to be such a heavy-handed effect that anything kind of goes, because there's no reason to really do it unless you're doing something that's really extreme, right? Because the sound of an acoustic guitar is the acoustic guitar. Amp distortion is a lot more complex than like tape saturation. You know, you have a really skewed frequency response because you're dealing with a whole preamp section. Then, of course, there's going to be some form of cabinet emulation. So an acoustic guitar ran through that is just going to be very bizarre. It could be cool, though, right? You might, like, I've done things like, I do this with vocals all the time, where I'll take a vocal track and run it through an amp sim and blend that back in parallel with the original vocal track in a subtle way to make the vocals have a lot of character. And maybe you could do something like that with an acoustic guitar. I can't say I ever have. So I can't tell you how to process it because that's such an extreme effect that, I mean, anything goes, man. You could maybe filter out all the low end and just have the saturation from the amp sim be in the top end, or you could filter out all the top end and bottom end and just have it be the mid range. The options are limitless when you're dealing with something that's that extreme. But great question. Okay, Luke Trina says it makes sense. Oh. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to miss any of these questions. Oh, by the way, let me let everyone know. People have been asking. For the next day, only for the next 24 hours, I've opened the doors to the Frightbox Mix Crypt, which is my private community where we mix a brand new song every single month. We also have private coaching calls where I help everyone out with their productions. And there's a monthly group coaching session where I critique member mixes. So if you need help with your mixes, need feedback from other like-minded engineers, now's your chance. The doors are open until tomorrow night at midnight. And I have left a link in the actual video description. So I think that's how I could do it. I'll drop it in the chat also. Yeah, so if you want to check out the Frightbox Mix Script, there you go. Okay, let me go back in time so I can not, so I don't miss any of these questions. There's so many good ones. Okay, Luke Trina says, makes sense. I do always keep the bass kick centered. I guess more how to add heaviness, fullness during mixing after recording and before mastering. Heaviness and heaviness as far as guitar tone comes from the tone itself and balance, right? So another thing is that a lot of people, especially guitar players, we obsess over guitar tone, but a lot of our favorite heavy sounding records, it's the whole picture. It's the bass tone, the aggressiveness of the drums, the tightness of everything. That's where it really comes from. Now, if you're dealing with an issue where your mixes always sound thin, that could be an infinite amount of different things. That could be just bad sounding drums. It could be bad sounding bass guitar. It could be everything sounding awesome, but your guitars are kind of out of whack as far as not using the right IR, using the right cab. It could be anything, man. But more often than not, when people send me their mixes and they're not happy, it's one of two things. It's balance. The balance is way off, and the performances and editing are way off. And I hear things that are really out of tune and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, just some food for thought. I think that'll help kind of point you in the right direction. It's a lot simpler than people think when you really take a step back. But great question. Thank you so much. Okay, so Alex Roque says, the C4 EQ is awesome. I always used the Palm Mutes too, but using TDR Nova now. Awesome. I have no idea what TDR Nova is, but I'm sure it's sick. Knives to the birds. That's a great. I wonder if is that your band name? It's pretty cool. I'm OCD and literally grid every bass and guitar note, and I beat myself up whenever I'm literally less than 20 milliseconds ahead or behind the beat. Okay, so you're asking a similar question to someone else was asking, what is acceptable? Dude, well, the truth is when ahead of the beat is almost never good in my opinion, but if you're slightly behind, that's actually good. That means you're playing with feel, in my opinion. You know, like I can always tell when I'm recording. Addison, my friend Addison's a great example here. I remember Addison, when we did the last album, the last Iron Sentiment, full length, dude, you were banging through those rhythm tracks. And I remember when I would zoom in, like you were in the pocket all of the time. And I remember you telling me those because you were playing so much guitar and you guys did so much pre-production and so much practicing for that album that you were so in the zone that I didn't have to do much editing to those guitars because you were already pocketed. That's a prime example. I prefer that because it's easy to pull stuff ahead if it's really behind, but things being behind is never the issue. It's when people rush and then they're behind and rush and behind and rush. And then if you add another person into the mix and they're all over the place, that's when you can kind of have a slop city situation and you really have to do a lot of surgical work. But dude, knives to the birds, I wouldn't worry about being 20 milliseconds behind because that's actually a good thing. That actually sounds good to me. Like when the drums are dead on and the guitar is slightly behind, it sounds way heavier. It's just way more natural to the ear. So great question. Ben Martin says, do you feel it's necessary to side pass the bass every time the kick hits? Absolutely not. I think you mean side chain the bass. There are guys or girls that do that. I don't do it. Unless, okay, if I'm doing something really mechanical and like super genty, again, there's gent has kind of died out. Thank God. But gent has really died out. And like when I would get a lot of those fake drum mixes where the band wants to sound like a giant robot, I would do that with a lot of the heavier parts to make sure the kick is really punching through. But dude, if you're doing thrash or something like that, it's going to be a mess because that kick is going to be all over the place because there's so many kick drums, right? I don't do it. Although I'm trying to think of someone that does. I can't off the top of my head. You guys might know more than me. I don't do it. Unless it's something that is really extreme and almost EDM-esque, if that makes sense. Great question. Greg Allen, how loud should my virtual drums be out of the box? It's completely subjective and completely depends on your mix. I mean, virtual drums are recorded perfectly at the source, so you really don't have to worry about it. If you're recording your own drums, then you have to just make sure you're not in the noise floor, which is pretty hard to do. And of course, you're not clipping. I see a lot of that when I get tracks to mix that were recorded in a home studio where people just record literally digitally clipping. And you cannot undo that. You could try to fix it. You could try to save it with like specialty plugins, but it's just better to not do that. But virtual drums are pretty much plug and play. They're designed that way. Joe exclamation point. What is your recommendation for Headroom on transients versus the rest of the mix for a proper master? There's no exact. I mean, let me pull up another mix here. Let me show you a good example. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm gonna pull up a more modern style, like brutal kind of thing for you guys. What I have up right now is more of a rock thing, and of course, I think there are more metalheads here than anything else. I'm assuming. Where is this thing? The song we did last, my boys in a band called Me With Creeps that I used to do a lot of work with. Unfortunately, the band no longer exists. Good friends of mine. The productions are way more modern, way more grid edited, way more just like super thick and loud and modern than the one I played before was one of my band songs, and we're more of like a rock kind of thing. But I'll show you what I'm talking about to answer your question. Let me make sure I'm not too far behind here. Okay, I'm gonna make this quick. Come on, Pro Tools, you can do it, Pro Tools. All right. Okay, so here's my drum bus. Can you guys see that? So if you notice, my drum bus is hardly moving, right? And that's because it's a multi-layer thing. You know, you cannot have your drums be too spiky and dynamic and then try to do it all at the end of the mix. It's not going to work. So I have a little bit of saturation to help add some extra glue to the mix, which is also, or to the drum mix, which is shaving off some transient. I have a tape saturator / clipper, which is shaving off more transient. I have a multi-band transient shaper, which is shaving off more transient in the mids. Then I have obviously my bus compressor. Then I have another multi-band, another tape saturator, multi-band compressor, and then a limiter. So as you can see, it's little bits of stages. I don't say, oh, I need to limit these drums by 4. It's a slow, gradual massage of the mix that gives you extra headroom. So by the time you get to mastering, you don't have to do a lot. That's how I approach it. Okay, great question. Hopefully that answers it. Let me go back in time here. Thank you, JS. I'm glad you dig it, man. Thank you so much for watching. Lots of new stuff coming on in the works for the channel. I'm so pumped up about it, I just can't share it right now. But thank you for watching. Okay, Alex Aguirre. Other than referencing how do you ensure your bass is on point every time, I watched a video of Dan Warhol saying that balancing low end is not about faders, but about everything else not competing. Oh, he's right, dude. I agree 100%. There is no, here's the thing with questions like this, is that okay, let me give you an example. This mix I'm playing right now, it sounds massive, right? The last mix sounds big also. There is way more low end in the last mix than this mix because it's a simpler song. There's less happening. The guitars are not playing chugga 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 chugga, right? So because the guitars are not going chugga chugga chugga, you can allow your bass guitar to be way fatter. If I just plopped that bass mix into this mix, it would be messy and the low end would completely fall apart. Everything is context. Everything is how everything fits together, right? So that's the thing. There's no one answer to your question. It's a great question, and it's something I used to think about a lot. But yeah, it's just a matter of building off of what you're working with. Depends on the tempo of the song, depends on the tones that you have to work with, depends on the tuning of the kick drum. It depends on so many different things. A kick drum that's more of a medium tuning generally can be a little louder because there's less low end and it's not going to, eat up headroom on your 2-bus as an example. So great question. Great question. I'm taking another sip of my protein drink. Let's talk about Reaper. It says, don't sleep on Audio Assault's new amp locker beta. That free Prestige amp is quite nice. I'm going to be honest, dude, I probably won't check it out for the next 30 years. I'm late to the party with everything. I'm the kind of person, if something's working, I stick with it. But I'll keep that in mind because I keep hearing about Audio Assault. I don't know I guess they're a company. I'll check it out. Okay, Who We Are asks another question. Any tips on using stock autotune plugins in Reaper? I want to use it live, but there's a delay. The autotune becomes out of sync. Dude, you might want to ask, let's talk about Reaper. He's the Reaper expert. I am not a Reaper expert, although I do use Reaper for live recordings because Reaper is the most stable DAW I've ever come across in my life. 5 million times more stable than Pro Tools. So yeah, as far as I have no experience using live autotune, unfortunately. I'm sure it's not hard to do because bands are using it more and more. Yeah, I would say check out Let's Talk About Reaper's channel. Also, I know Let's Talk About Reaper, dude. I think I think he has a Discord you could join as well. Other Reaper users, Reaper users, not Reaper users. Ben, Bobby, what are your recommended settings for delay on metal solo guitars? Again, it can greatly. There's a bunch of different factors. I'm a huge fan of just simple quarter note delay. For example, in this song, I don't know if there's a solo in this song, unfortunately. I do not think there's a solo. But there's a kick-ass vocal performance by my friend Jenny. She's awesome. Jenny Torres. Not of relation. We are not related. But quarter note delay sync to the tempo of the song. That's my general go-to for lead guitars. Good question. Jimmy Ganji says, Bobby, have you ever done a doom metal band yet? Not really, no, man. You know what it is? A lot of the doom metal bands, they want to use like loud as hell amps. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of doom. If I'm being completely honest, it really bores me to. It puts me to sleep. Some of it is cool. The closest I think I've ever come to doom is my friends in the band Cemeteries, but they're more like grindcore, I think you could say. Although I gotta say, Green Inferno was sick the other night. We played with Green Inferno; they were really good. But yeah, Doom is a whole different jam. You know, my productions are generally more polished, and a lot of those bands want like a vintage aesthetic. I'm more of a fan of that these days than I used to be. But yeah, a lot of those bands are not really into my style of production, if I'm being honest. But maybe one day. Good question. Okay, so my man Dan is here, dude. I'm so happy to have you here, man. Obsidian Recordings, do you know an alternative for Macy tape head? Ooh, and Crane Song for us non-Pro Tools users. That's a great question. I've tried a lot of these big tape GUI plugins, but they're super that's weird. Because the ones I use are all pretty light on CPU. Dude, I don't use Macy tapehead. I don't use Macy tapehead and Crane Song. I don't use much at all anymore, if I'm being completely honest with you. Crane Song hasn't been updated in a long time. And Macy tapehead I used to use, but it's really pretty heavy-handed. So I don't use it a lot. I haven't used it in many, many years. My main jam for... Whoops, I keep doing that to the chat. My main jam for saturation is really this vintage... this vintage warmer plugin, which works with any DAW. And then mainly I just use a lot of the stock saturators right in Pro Tools. The stock saturator in Reaper is pretty good. I've used that a lot. I don't know what your DAW is, but I'm sure your DAW has a stock saturator that's probably more decent than you would think. So good question. SoftTube, I've heard good things about. I think I had that for a while. I think it's free, I think. Dan says, I can't hear anything because I'm out to eat with my family, but I just wanted to say hi to one of the nicest, most talented Oh, dude, well, thank you, man. Bobby T of Clifton. Also, my Jimbo is here. Yeah, man. Well, Dan and Jim, it's great to have you. Guys, I've worked with Dan and Jim so many times in the studio, specifically Dan. I've been recording Dan since 2006. That's what's awesome about the studio. You know, some of my best friends, actually, Addison's a perfect example, Dan and Addison. You know, when you spend so much time with bands in the studio, you become friends a lot of the times. Actually, the other project I'm in, this band called Voidscape, I met all those guys by being a recording engineer. So such a great little profession to have. So Dan, thank you for joining us. Okay, Marcel. Oh, I gotta go back up. I apologize, guys. I'm kind of falling behind here. Okay, pronounce Marcel. Okay, I got it right. Look at that. On my bass group, for example, I have all the clean DI, saturated tone, amp, etc. under a group, and I just use a Pultec sim. Is it okay to use more EQ? Dude, there's no rules, man. I mean, yeah, why not? You know, there are no rules. I err on the side of simplicity. But it doesn't matter, you know, like if you feel like you need more tape saturation to add more grit and juiciness to your bass sound on your submix, do it, you know. Sometimes, dude, some of my mixes have a bass submix, some of them don't. This mix does, the last mix didn't. It just depends on the mix, depends on what mood I'm in too, to be honest with you. So great question. If it sounds good, it is good. Hello, thanks for your best tips and lessons. This is from TNT Studios. I just wanted to ask kindly, could you please explain panning main mistakes? Oh, I can tell you in one sentence and how to do advanced panning. Okay, don't do advanced panning and mainly use LCR and don't worry about it. I don't know. On YouTube, everyone freaks out about panning, but whenever I've worked alongside other pros, they're mainly using LCR, right? Jordan Valeriat, I've seen in his mixes. I've never obviously worked along Chris Lord Algae, but I think he's an LCR guy. And what I mean by LCR is most of my tracks are hard left, hard right, or up to center. Now, there are some exceptions. Toms, like if we go through this mix, hard pan, up to center, hard pan. The toms are panned slightly in. You know, for me, the main exceptions would be toms, lead guitar. Sometimes I'll pan in if it's a background thing, and maybe some vocals or something like that. But like most of my tracks are LCR. There you go. It's funny because people will generally send me their mixes saying, "Oh, it doesn't sound wide." And I'm like, well, what do you have in your two bus? Oh, I have 25 different stereo wideners. I'm like, are you using LCR? No, because I'm worried about phase. And I'm like, dude, when you use stereo wideners, you are messing with phase big time. That's a lot of stereo wideners, maybe even all, mess with phase. It's an illusion. So it's better to just, in my opinion, hard pan and don't worry about it. If it's good enough for the greats, it's good enough for me. Great question, man. I love that. I'm gonna do more videos on that actually, because people still ask about it a lot. Okay, Diosa. Hi. When recording guitar directly into the audio interface, how do you apply the amp sim distortion as you're playing without making the recording too muddy? Well, dude, an amp sim is just a monitoring device. So that it would have, if you have a muddy tone, it's because you're using a muddy amp sim or muddy impulse response, or you're not, you know what I mean? Like an amp sim, like if I'm recording guitars at home, which I do all of the time, right? What you're really recording is a clean DI, and the amp sim is just there for monitoring. And then obviously if you play your audio back, you're hearing the amp sim, but it's just an effect that's being applied to your DI. Of course, when you get toward the end of your production and you're ready to mix, I recommend bouncing that down to a track that's committed. For example, I keep doing that. I keep making the chat bigger instead of Pro Tools. Let me see if I don't know if there are any amp sims in this particular mix. Oh, there are. Okay. So this is a real amp. But here are some amp sims, which are just some overdubs in the background, like a clean, jangly, lo-fi kind of thing. Generally, I print my amp sims, but because this is such a simple part and I'm using such a lightweight amp sim, I'm not. But dude, if I were to mute this, it's very quiet, but those are the DIs. So that's how that works. I should do some videos on that as well. That's a great question. Dio Seo Diasa. I know I'm butchering what you're asking. That's a great question. I think I'm going to do a video on that. Good stuff. Oh, Knives to the Birds. That's his band name or her band name. Great, good stuff. It's a cool name. Although I don't endorse hurting any birds. Ryan Clark, what are some albums you have mixed that you are proud of? A lot, dude. I really like the last Tombs record that I produced. I really like the last Poeta album. And I'm really happy. I'm working with a new band right now in the studio. They're like a pop rock indie. I don't want to call them indie rock, but they're like a hard rock kind of thing, female fronted. They're called Raising Arizona, brand new band, and I'm loving the way those songs are coming out. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I don't record as much as I used to because I'm so busy with YouTube and so busy with the Mixcrypt. But this year I've been doing live recording, doing studio recording, and I've been all over the place. I actually have to dial it back next year because I'm going insane. But those are a few albums to check out. Check out the newest Tombs record on Seasons of the Mist. I'm a huge fan of that one. It's a cool blend of like my modern stuff and my more like I guess lo-fi kind of stuff because they have some black metal elements as well. Okay. Necessity. If it's really hot in your home studio, then is it bad to record with a fan on? Is there any way to angle it a way that is not picked up by the mic? Dude, that's a great question. I record in the most low budget bootleg studio in existence, my actual project studio, not my house, my project studio. And we leave the AC on and I don't give a crap, dude. I just let that AC blow right onto the mic. But all jokes aside, if you're using a microphone like a Shure SM7B, it's a lot more forgiving for background noise. So I would go with something like that if you're recording in a home studio and you have a really live space with a lot of extra noise. I've never had an issue. And I've recorded, dude, I've recorded with drummers playing next door and it's bleeding. It's never been a huge thing for me. Now, if I'm recording Celine Dion and she's talking this quietly, maybe it'll be an issue, but I recommend using a dynamic mic. Good question. Okay, Null Netetson. I can't pronounce things today. Either that or people have really hard to pronounce names and usernames. What do you do to cool down after a long day of mixing? Cool down. Well, I mean, what I like to do is I don't mix any longer than 2 or 3 hours at a pop. So I'll do like a 2 or 3 hour stint, then maybe take a break, and then maybe another 2 or 3 hours like stint of mixing. And then if I'm, not a long time, but when I would go through these crazy periods and I'm working with like 5 bands at once, I would do 3 sets of 3. So 3 hours in the morning, break, workout, 3 sets, another 3 hours, break. I always have to retune my ear after a while because after a while, you just get burnt out, For tracking, I refuse to track more than 5 hours in a row. Like back in the day, I would do these crazy sessions where I would track 8 hours. Dude, I'm like good for 5 intense tracking, especially if it's like a technical metal thing where I'm like paying attention to tuning and editing on the fly. After 5 hours, I'm out of there. I'd rather make the sessions productive than be burnt out and not even know what I'm listening to. So good question. So yeah, 2 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 3 with watching some YouTube in between or something or reading a book. Okay, so who we are at different ways of viewed automation. I mean, that's a pretty broad, but the main 2 ways that I use it is for sending certain elements to like a delay. Like for example, let's check this out. See what we got. Let me go to the chorus. Okay, perfect example. So on this, he says, all mistakes to me or something. I don't remember what he says here. I'm sending just that last word. It's really subtle because it's in sync with the music, so it blends in. But on certain words and phrases, I'll send them to a delay. It's very common. All mixers do this. It's very common. That's technique number one that I use, and then a lot of volume automation. A ton of volume automation. Most people don't want to do this because it's boring. Perfect example. My guitar tracks here, rhythm guitars are loud in the beginning. And then the verse, they're a little quieter. The reason why and then the chorus, the second half of the verse, they're quieter, and then they kick back up in the chorus. Depends on the song. The reason why I'm doing that is the bass is way more interesting in the verse than the guitar, and I want the bass to take center stage. And then during the pre-chorus, something else happens that's, there's synths that come in. Then the chorus kicks in, and I want it to be all about the guitar again. So volume automation is a huge part of my workflow, and if you watch anyone that does mixing for real, a lot of volume automation. There's no plug and play. I get people all the time, oh, can I use sidechain instead of volume automation? No, because sometimes you emotionally might want to hear something more, and it's not a level thing on a meter, right? Like, for me, this is something that I wanted to hear, my ear wanted to hear. I wanted to hear less guitar in the verse, and how would the plugin know how to do that? It wouldn't. It's a human artistic decision. So great question. Okay, let me go back here. Ben, sorry guys, I don't want to miss anything. Ben Martin, thanks man. Yeah, meant sidechain. Okay, I channel the choir and sings into strings into a reverb bus to glue them all together in my mix. Is there a better way of replacing them within a mix, such as a limiter? Replacing them, dude. That's very, 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 very subjective and very. It all depends on the music. I mean, is there a way to reverb? I mean, reverb and limiting are two completely different things. So if it sounds good, man, it is good. I'm sure there are engineers out there that use a ton of reverb on strings, and I'm sure there are engineers out there that use no reverb on strings. It depends on the mix, depends on what you're going for. So sorry, I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer on that. Okay, and then let's talk about Reaper. Let's talk about vocal tuning. Good stuff. Oh, good point here. He brought up the samples of latency, which is like your buffer size. You might want to try, using a smaller buffer. Redwood Lloyd, which, dude, I think you just joined the crypt, man. Congratulations. It's so good to have you with us after all these years of, interacting on YouTube. Can't wait for the call on Saturday. Hey, Bobby, how do you deal with clients with high expectations? Dude, what I've learned, man, at this point is I only will work with clients that I jive with musically, and the biggest one is personality-wise, because there are people out there that are just major pains in the asses. If I'm being completely honest with you, the worst is when you have a band where one person wants to be Green Day, the other person wants to be Periphery, the bass, this person wants to be, I don't know, Kelly Clarkson or something, right? Like, and then they're calling you, trying to tell you to like make the guy lower in the mix, and the other guy's calling you. So what I've done to make my life way easier is I only work with bands that are cool. If I'm being completely honest, what's funny is when you do that, you then start to attract other bands that are cool. It's weird. Like you attract more of the people you work with. When I was younger, I would just say yes to everyone, which is the worst mistake in the world. And then you end up with a lot of projects where you're like, why did I take this? So as far as expectations, I just make sure I'm the right fit for the client. Just recently, oh God, were they indie rock or punk rock or something like? I can't remember. Some band hit me up from my area actually, and I could tell right away they weren't the right band for me because I asked for demos and they just didn't have. So I'm like, all right, if they can't even record demos, I don't want to do it. So good question, Mr. Lloyd. Message retracted. Okay. Jimmy Ganji, it's all good. Maybe you could record my doom metal band. Yeah, dude, well, keep me posted. Olivier Dumont. No question right now, but just wanted to say that I just finished both of your courses and it skyrocketed my production quality, especially with my workflow. Awesome, man. Dude, I'm so happy to hear that, Olivier. Good stuff, man. I put a lot of work into my courses. It's like my whole passion. And I'm just trying to teach people what I know. And I want people to skip over all the crap that I went through. Like that client thing I just mentioned to Redwood Lloyd. If I would have known that when I was 20 years old, my life would have been different. I would have gotten way better results way sooner, but I was, I didn't have that experience. So, my goal is to pass my experience along to you guys. Okay, Roy, another Mixscript member. Hey dude, that's a nice looking Voidscape shirt you got there. Thanks, man. Yeah, I gotta look to see if Mike has them online. I have no idea. All I do is play guitar. So, but I'll look into that. Thank you, I appreciate that. Maybe you could pick them up on Bandcamp or something. DJ Victor Nova, question, do you think it's possible to have a competing mix or master without nothing on the master? No, man, you need something on the master because, so like I just shared, all right, let's take a look at this mix. Now this mix is very tame compared to like crazy, clipped, brutally harsh sounding modern stuff. It's still loud, but I mean, I have a lot of little things going on. Let's go through the chugga parts. All right, so I got a compressor, and this is just the master. Tape saturation, very small amount of EQ. And when I say small amount, I mean like next to nothing, because I really concentrate on the mix itself. On my multiband compressor, a little bit of action there. This EQ is doing nothing, literally nothing. And then in my mastering my mastering plugin, I have a little bit of an exciter, adding more juice. And then a little bit of limiting. So they're all doing very little, but if you were to take all of this off, man, it's gonna fall apart completely. Actually, you can't even hear it. Let me crank it up so we can get a realistic A/B comparison. Multi-mono. Let's crank this guy up. It's still so quiet. Let's see. This is how weak that sounds. Super weak, and that's because it's overly dynamic, right? So, yeah, getting a competitive master with nothing on the master, that's virtually impossible. But good question. Let me go back in time here. Okay, so Olivier Dumont. Guys, give me 1 second. Okay, just making sure my door's locked. Okay. Okay, Olivier asks a great question as far he asks, why do you use parallel compression on drums? Okay, I have 3 different scenarios when it comes to compression on drum submixes, right? Scenario number 1, a super open, super organic drum sound that's very dynamic. I don't use any compression, 0, right? Scenario number 2, I want the drums to be slightly glued together. I will use a compression across the main. I don't use any parallel compression, but I compress the drum submix by a few dB, just to add a little bit of subtle glue. Scenario number 3, like this mix right here, I want to slam the living hell out of the drums. I want them to sound huge. I want them to sound like the most massive thing in the world. I don't care if they sound like a real drum set. Then I'll smash the drums with parallel compression. In my mind, parallel compression is almost like an exaggerated form of the drum sound. So let's see if I can go here. Let me get my chain back. So this guy right here is my parallel compression chain, and that's it's about 50% parallel compression or 50% compression, 50% uncompressed, and that's why you get that super pumpy drum sound. I found with crazy fast music that's bonkers, parallel compression can, for me, this is just me, can sound messy. But then again, there are people that make it work. I like when the more technical the music, the more fast it is, the less compression I like to use because it just starts to sound weird, unless it's insanely tight. That's why when I mix live music, which I do a lot, I don't use any compression because I don't want to highlight any inconsistencies or any sloppiness that every human is going to have. I mean, no human is perfect. And when you overcompress things, it's too clear, if that makes sense, and makes the inconsistencies kind of on display. So hopefully that makes sense. Great question. Let's see. Thank you, Bobby, for great lessons. It helped me a lot. What's your astrological sign? Favorite mixer? Best regard? Oh, great question, man. I am a Cancer as far as astrology, and because my birthday's in July. My favorite mixer of all time, dude. There's so many. Because I listen to so many different genres of music. I've been on a huge 70s kick. Addison we were talking about that. He was playing amazing 70s albums the other day. Vinyl. I mean, if I had to go with my favorite producer of all time, I mean, for metal, I really love Andy Sneap's work. I love Jens Bogren's work. I love Steve Albini's work. Butch Vig is amazing. There's too many good ones to name, but as far as metal, I think Andy Sneap is probably my favorite. I love his newer stuff as well because it's more organic sounding and it's a great blend of like modern production with like old school production, and it just has an earthy quality to it that's just awesome. I guess Andy Sneap would be my favorite metal guy. Great question. And Jordan Valerian, I'm a huge fan of. Dan Korneff, another good one. A lot of good guys out there. A lot of good just engineers in general. All right, so the neighbor guy. New here. Hardware question for SD3. I don't know what SD3 is. Superior Drummer 3, I guess? Any issue with running from an internal SD and loading libraries from an external SD, or would loading from a separate internal SSD be better? Dude, SSDs are so fast now, I wouldn't imagine that being an issue. Because the way I understand it, I think anyway, because I don't use Superior Drummer, I only use Easy Drummer. Dude, guys, I'm going to be honest. I use one drum library, one drum plugin I've been using since 2011, and I've never found the need to switch. I use the Metal Machine Pack by Easy Drummer. The thing I will do, though, is I use my own samples, and I've replaced them with my own drum sounds. But the cymbals sound so great, I don't have a reason to use anything else. Because people ask me about reviewing. There's so many pieces of software now, it makes my head explode. But I don't think it's an issue because I think it loads into RAM, dude. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I hope I'm not saying the right thing, but I think, I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing. I think that the plugin loads the samples into RAM because they're meant to be played in real time. So I don't think they would design it if it's being pulled constantly off of an external drive. And even if it is, it should be pretty fast. Okay, great question. Mr. Ghoul asks, do you believe you should not record yourself or your own band? Or is it just stupid not if you can't? Dude, that is baloney, man. I've been recording my own band since the get-go. Now, if you are there are some people out there that are way too insane perfectionists to a fault. I'm not perfect, don't get me wrong. Now I'm really good at compartmentalizing. Like when I work on my own projects, I am thinking like the producer. I'm not thinking like the guitar player. If a guitar part sucks, I'll cut it out. I don't care. You know, like my new thing is I'm just cutting solos out, dude. Like I'm tired of solos personally, and I'm the guitar player saying this. So if you're good at compartmentalizing, but no, I mean, I think you should record your own stuff. Now it depends. If you're in a serious band and you guys are doing this as a career and you're touring and you're really, really, dedicating your life to this, different story because, you know, there's a lot more on the line. But if you're just doing this as a hobby and you're doing it for fun, why not record yourself, you know? At least record your own demos. I think every band should be recording their own demos. Every band should have a DAW. Everybody should be recording their own demos so they can hear what the bass player is actually playing and what the drummer is actually playing. Yeah, that's my take on that. Because I've worked with so many bands where like we're recording and the guitar player's like, wait, you were playing like that the whole time? And it's like they've had this song for 4 years and they didn't notice the bass player was like 2 steps off from the guitar player. So I think everyone should at least be doing their own demos at the minimum. Great question. Love that. Love stuff like that. Lost April. Hey Bobby, can you please show us how to mix synths in a metal track? You just use automation on the guitars and make your perfect example here. There's some synths in this song actually. Admittedly, the synths are not the center thing here, right? It's mainly about the guitars. But what I do to make room for my synths is I will lower the guitars when they pop in so there's room for everything. You have to use volume automation. There's no magic, cut this frequency, boost that frequency, and you're good. If it were that easy, you wouldn't have to hire professional mixing engineers, and we would all just be good at mixing instantaneously. A lot of it has to do with basic balance. Now, I could say this: if you're using a lot of buzzy sounds, you might want to roll off more high end than you would think. You're probably going to want to roll off more low end than you would think. If you have a fat bass, fat guitar, fat drum sound, you can't have a ton of low end on your synth. It's going to eat up headroom and it's going to conflict. So your synths, don't worry about them sounding huge in and of themselves. Worry about how it sounds in context. For example, maybe I'll have a song with an intro that's all synths. I'll allow more low end than top end in those synths. And then when the band kicks in, I'll use a filtered version. That's something that I could say, right? But a lot of it, man, is just basic volume automation. Great question. Okay, so sneak people of that certain sample you were telling me about. Come on, give me the live, the exclusive peek. Oh, the sample that you were telling me about. Addison, I don't know what you're referring to. The sample I was telling about. I don't know, man. I gotta know if you meant the future content. Let me know what you mean by that. Great question. Okay, Anthony. Hello, Bobby. Love your stuff. You really helped me a lot growing on as a producer. Dude, I'm happy to hear that, man. Awesome. It pumps me up. Okay. Diosa adiosa. Any advice for someone just starting off their music career in 2023? How do you find clients, projects to work with? Dude, that's a great question. Or dudette. I can't see your picture. So, sorry. I don't know if you were a guy or a girl, but, okay. I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell. Anyone who's here that's interested in working with clients, do you know how you get clients and you'll probably blow away your competition in your local area? I'm going to tell it to you. Ready? Be cool and edit stuff. If you tune vocals and edit drums, you will literally be a diamond in the rough because nobody wants to do that. And the people that do that get all the work, if I'm being honest. I've seen so many studios around my area that have gone out of business because they were those classic studios that were really nice, a lot of analog gear, all this stuff. But it's like engineers, I should say, not even really producers, that just like press record and don't care. And like that does not fly anymore. Like you have to really, really be bringing value to the artists. Helping them out with songwriting, think about it from the band's perspective, right? I also want to say this. If you work with one good band, in my opinion, and in my experience, working with one good band is infinitely more important than working with 10 crappy bands that it's going to just get you more crappy bands, right? Because unfortunately, not all bands are created equal. There are a lot of bands that don't take it seriously. And just working with them, you're going to attract more bands like that. They're going to be the cheapest people in the world. They're not going to want to pay you. But if you work with bands that take it seriously, to them, it's a career. So if you offer value to them, you're going to attract their friend's band. And that friend's band is going to turn into two bands and so on and so forth. But yeah, if you edit drums and you tune vocals and you really put the time in, you will get work. I guarantee it. As long as your mixes are decent, they don't even have to be amazing. If they're decent, you'll get the work. Because everybody wants to mix. Everybody wants to mess around with plugins and talk about gear, but nobody wants to actually do the grunt work, which makes the real difference, which is editing, especially in metal. So that's the truth. That's the cold, hard truth. Hopefully that helps. Great question. I love it. I'm going to be doing more content on this topic in the future. Oh, Addison, thank you. The snares pack. Yes, it's coming up. I'm doing a video very soon about a snare sample pack that I'm putting together. I'm surprised you remember that. Good memory. Wow, Addison knows everything. You and my friend Tara know everything somehow. You're like matrix into my brain. There's a video coming very soon on the channel about, I recorded a snare sample pack in a very, very unexpected way. So that's what it's going to be about. Okay, so Minko says, love your channel. Your best tip when using MIDI drums, like get good drums to sound realistic. Awesome. I'm glad you dig the content. Kevin Mulally. Any experience with guitar pickups picking up computer noise when recording in front of it, even when not connected to my interface? I hear noise using my battery practice amp unless I have move away. That doesn't sound right. You might have something wrong with your ground lift. Something's not grounded right or something. I would say check your cable and bring your guitar to a repair shop and make sure everything is wired properly, because that does not sound right. Unless you're using vintage single coil pickups that are really noisy. I don't think that's the case. Most people watching this channel are not using vintage single coil pickups. Kevin, give that a shot. That doesn't sound right. Dolores Claiborne. Hi, everyone. Hello. Okay, so Who We Are asks, how do you get a kick to cut through bass in the metal mix? Again, it depends on the sources. So I'll go back to this mix. So you can hear this kick drum as clear as day. The reason why it's clear as day is the drums are tight as hell, and the bass is tight as hell, and the guitars are tight as hell. If this were recorded sloppily and nothing was edited, you're not going to hear this kick in a million years, right? So obviously there's also the EQ that comes into play. If you notice, I'm talking about performance first because that's the most important thing. The EQ and all that stuff is secondary. But yeah, like in this case, I'm scooping out some mid-range. I'm not even boosting any top end in this particular case, but it's just so well performed that it cuts through the mix easily. And that's the truth. So there's no secret to it, you know? Great question though. Obviously, you know, if you have a muffly sounding kick, boosting top end, cutting mid-range will help, but it's better to just use a kick drum that sounds right in the first place. If you're using MIDI drums, you have nothing to worry about because most MIDI drums just sound good. The work is done for you, so to speak. But great question. Ben, I'm so happy to hear that you've been digging the channel. Thank you so much. we got a good one. Nullnetizen. I must be having like I cannot read today for some reason, or at least cannot read these names. But I can read the messages though, so I guess that's what matters. If your house was on fire and everything of actual importance was protected and safe, what VHS tape would you grab to save? Ooh. Okay, so do I have it here? Oh man, I might have it downstairs, right? I might have put it back into my basement. But I've been a horror fan since I was a little kid. Like we're talking 4 years old. My uncle has an insane movie collection, and he let me borrow Halloween to watch when I would stay at my grandparents' house. And I fell in love with Halloween when I was a little kid. Long story short, I wanted a copy for myself for my house, right? We're talking like 1990 or 1989. So my grandmother bought me a copy of Halloween, the media release. Dude, it turned out to be a gem because what it was, they accidentally distributed the TV version by accident. And I think it was obscure. I think they only did like I don't know. I'm just going to throw a number out there. I think like only 1,000 copies of this. And I have it. And I remember when I was a kid watching it, I'm like, why is my version of Halloween look different than Uncle Leo's? Now we have to remember, this is the 80s and 90s. There's no internet. I didn't know. I just thought I had another version of Halloween. Turns out I had the TV version, and I didn't know until 20 years later. So that would be the first VHS tape I would take out of my house. Great question. Okay, so oh man, my man Castle Ultra, Mike, good to have you here. Went to a show the other night, and it reminded me that you also do live sound. Have you ever had technical issues during a show that was a nightmare to figure out? Oh my God, dude, I have stories for days. Technical issues is the foundation of live sound. That seems like a nightmare to me. Dude, you know what's funny? I'm an introvert, believe it or not. Like when I'm around a lot of people, it generally drains me. But for some bizarre reason, doing live sound in a high pressure situation amps me up, and I absolutely love it. Let me just tell you this. The first live show I ever did was 2017 and was for the band Psycho Stick. It was a sold out show, and I had never mixed live sound in my life. Shout out to Cooper Davis. He was the main sound guy at the club that I was working at the time, and he gave me a crash course on live sound like the week before or something, and I was thrown right into the fire. Dude, microphones weren't working. There was an issue with this, and I had to do this in front of a packed house. I was sweating bullets, but I loved it. So the only way, dude, I gotta say, the pressure of being live in front of people, you figure it out, dude. You figure it out somehow. As long as you understand audio to a certain extent, you understand the gear, you figure it out. But it is, you know, it is a nightmare, but in a good way. As long as it's not like a hip hop show. I've done some hip hop shows and never again. But metal shows and rock shows, I love it. Okay, so Ben, do you pull down the dB on the double bass drums when there are long continuous? Yes, I do. If it's a sample or if it's MIDI drums, I will pull it down. Do I have anything going on here? Let's see. No, not in this mix. This mix is pretty straightforward. It's not crazy. Looks like I did and I undid it. But, oh, I did. Yeah, a little bit here. Maybe here. Looks like I did it and undid it actually in this mix. But yeah, if it's like technical metal and everything's fake, I will pull it down to make it sound a little more natural. Yeah, because kick drums that sound like a giant typewriter just generally don't sound that great to me. So great question, Ben. Oli, Oli Winkle. How to mix a vocal that is very dynamic, the singer is whispering in the verse and screams in the chorus. Great question. What you're going to want to do is separate the vocals to separate tracks if the vocal performance is so drastically different, and treat those sections differently. That's going to save you time because you're not going to have to use as much automation. And also you could use different EQ if you have to use different EQ, different compression if you have to use different compression, and so on and so forth. That's my solution there. I've recorded tons of singers. Now, the more experienced the singers are, they're going to know that, and they're going to say, okay, I've got a scream coming up. There's one of my good friends, Jimmy, another Jimmy, probably one of the best singers I've ever recorded in my life. Brutal as hell, every style of screaming you can imagine, but can sing. So what we would do is he's like, okay, I'm doing lows now, only lows. Okay, I'm doing mids now, only mids. Doing highs, and then it would be, okay, I'm doing cleans, I'm doing a harmony, I'm doing this, and like we would just bang it out that way. If it's someone that's less experienced, they're going to be all over the place. So what I would do is in post, cut those to separate tracks and treat them separately, treat them individually and whatever you see fit. Great question. Rose asks, do you bus your toms, and what processing do you use on that bus? Great question. Generally, I do not, but in this mix, I actually am. There's a reason why. Now, ironically, there are only 2 toms in this mix, and I had them bust. But... Okay. So here's my tom submix. I'm just rolling off some of the super duper top and some of the super duper bottom just to keep this mix nice and clean. I have a bus compressor, a toms compressor with a slower kind of compression to kind of bring out more smack out of the toms without them being... So I'll back up. I'm using a faster compressor on the individual toms, but I wanted a little more punch, and I'm using a slower compressor, like something that's a little more like an 1176 on the submix, just to kind of glue them together. And I'm pulling out a little bit of harshness at 2K. And then the big takeaway here is I'm using a transient shaper to bring out a lot of extra attack on the toms. I don't do this that often unless the mix really calls for it. This mix is so punchy and so massive and so huge that it needs that extra juice. These days, I really don't do this. I don't group my toms generally. It's not something I do all the time, but that's a great question, Rose. Thank you. Hopefully that answers it. Okay, I'm falling behind. Let me see here. Okay, let me take a sip of this protein drink. Guys, it's super hot in this room. I'm just going to lower the AC. Give me 1 second. It's spooky in my house because my girlfriend's not home and all the lights are out. So it's spooky. By the way, I don't know if anyone here saw Talk to Me. I think that movie's pretty good. Pretty good. I got to say, I'm not a big fan of most modern horror, but I was kind of creeped out. It gave me vibes of It Follows mixed with Pet Sematary, the original from the late 80s, and a little bit of Hereditary kind of thrown in. Okay, completely unrelated to what we're talking about. I just wanted to throw that in. Matt, question: do you ever record on amps line out via a load box, such as the 2 Notes Copter X or whatever that is? If so, in what situations and what unit? Cheers. Great question. My buddy Ben, who does a lot of production out of my studio, is a big fan of that. Dude, I think it's a great idea. Obviously, there are people that love their heads, and I think it's a great way to use your head without having to blast your cab, your actual physical cabs. Me personally, I don't use it because I'd rather just record DIs and then reamp it through a rail amp and just cut out the middleman or middlewoman, whatever, however you want to look at it, right? But what was the question? Do you ever record? Yeah, so that's your question. I don't really do it at all, actually. I'm an all or nothing kind of person. But with that being said, I think it's a great idea. It's just, it doesn't fit into my particular workflow. A lot of times, remember, I'm recording out of a budget project studio. So we don't have a lot of space, generally don't have a lot of time. So I'll just, again, perfect example, I'm recording a single with a band right now. We're recording all DIs. When it's all done, going to reamp those guys through a Marshall. I just want to say this, you do not have to reamp. Amp sims are just as good as real amps. I don't care what anyone says, and I use both. It's just that I like miking amps because it's fun, and you end up with, I like it because you end up with a slightly different tone from project to project, and that's what's exciting to me at this point. I do not like this is just me. I am not excited by prepackaged stuff, personally. Although I do use it from time to time, so hopefully that makes sense. Great question, Matt. Let me take my throat's... Okay. Anti-illusion. Hey, I have a million questions, and as soon as you're live, I can't think of any of them. I know the feeling, man. I would love if I could send in a mix and get your feedback. By the way, I learned so much from your channel. Dude, thank you so much. Honestly, I'm going to be completely honest with you, Anti-Illusion. I'm not doing mix critiques anymore, except for members of the Frightbox Mix Script. The reason being is I get so many, it's almost like when companies hit me up with the latest plugins, it makes my head like explode. So if you're interested, I'll go in the description. I'll say this again. So for the next 24 hours, I only open it up for a few days out of the entire year. My Frightbox Mix Script is open until tomorrow at midnight. We mix a brand new song every month. We have a private community. We critique each other's mixes. I do private mix critiques for the members of the Frightbox Mix Script live in a setting like this, except it's a little more intimate and I could talk to people individually. And again, we have a coaching call at the end of each month as well. And you have instant access to our entire back catalog, which is at 25 songs. I just filmed a masterclass today and a brand new song today. So who was asking that Anti-Illusion? If you're interested, there's a link in the description. And thank you so much for watching the channel. Okay, Death in Doom. How do I make my guitars ultra wide in the mix? SMTH, like Be Quiet and Drive by Deftones. Here's what you do. You record your guitars and you hard pan them. That's it. It's as simple as that. What kills me is people ask for, how do I make my guitars wide, but then they don't hard pan them. And that could just be, if you're reading things online and like a lot of, YouTubers on YouTube, people say this, but in reality, it's not really like this. They're obsessed with not panning things out. Hard pan and don't worry about it. So great question though. And I love Be Quiet and Drive. That's one of my favorite, just sounding productions of all time. I love the snare. Love that whole record, Deftones record. Okay. So Sid Heyo. I don't know if so your name is Sid and then you're saying heyo. Love the channel. Just curious what your top pick for drum sims. Is there something you choose over Superior Drummer 3? Dude, I don't use Superior Drummer. I use Easy Drummer 3 and I don't ever change from that because I don't need to. To be honest with you, I am not a fan. Let me just say, I feel bad for anyone that's a newbie now. There are so many options. It makes me anxious, to be honest with you. The companies that hit me up, I can't even, every 5 seconds is a new bass plugin, a new guitar plugin, a new drum plugin. It's just overwhelming. So I use Easy Drummer 3 and I use the Metal Machines pack and that's it. And the most as fancy as I get will be, I'll use my own samples with that. Now, but you have to do it manually. I use Slate Trigger to replace the sounds with my own sounds, and that's what I do. Great question, Sid. I wish I can give you something a little more gearheady than that, but I am not a gearhead at all. Okay, so Zactos, it's a cool name. Silly question, but when I track guitar, my waveforms aren't in the middle; they are only spiking up, if that makes sense. Not in the middle, spiking up. I don't. Well, I'll show you what my DIs look like. I don't know if this is what yours do. Now these guitars were reamped, so the DIs are not active right now. But here's what my DIs look like, and the DI is going to look different depending on your pickups, depending on your picking style. But if it sounds okay, I wouldn't worry about it. But these are what mine look like. So hopefully that helps you. Let me go back in time. Nolnatizen, you're great. We'll work together Sunday. Awesome. Thank you for watching the channel. Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Okay, DJ Victor Nova. Question. In such a visual way of working today, how important is music feel to you? And at what point in the process should we separate those two processes? That's a great question, man. As I've gotten older, it's become more and more important to me to concentrate on things like emotion and feeling. And dude, it's weird. I think we live in the best time in history to get it to be a musician, honestly. But it's also, for me, extremely overwhelming because it's just overload, man. There's so much out there, so many different tools. What I recommend is just picking a handful of tools that you know and just concentrate on making good music, whether that's writing a good song, whatever your jam is, right? Like not everybody cares about songwriting, but I'm just saying enjoying your instrument, making music that resonates with you, and just concentrating on that. So many people ask me about the technical end, which is what my channel is all about, but people will get obsessed about, the drum software and the amp software and this and that. And it's like, that takes me out of it, dude. That like pulls me out of what I love about music, if I'm being completely honest with you. Cause it's like, then it becomes like like I don't know, I'm in Toys R Us looking for video games instead of like thinking like, you know what I mean? Like when I listen to music, it's all about the enjoyment. I try to listen, like for example, like I'm a huge Wes Montgomery fan. When I listen to Wes Montgomery, I'm not thinking about his guitar, what he's playing through. I'm just listening and enjoying, right? And when I used to play music when I was a kid, or even when I was 10 years ago, I didn't think about, you know, what preamp am I going to record this through? It doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? There are great records that are made in bedrooms. There are great records that are made in multi-million-dollar facilities. I just kind of just try and focus on the music itself, if that makes sense. I hope that's not too vague, but that's the truth. Great question. Kelly Powers, Psycho Stick, grow a beard. Dude, it's funny. They did a great cover when I did them. I remember two things vividly. They did a great cover of Danger Zone, which was amazing. Those guys are insane musicians, by the way. Really, really cool guys to hang out with too. Danger Zone was amazing, and they also did a cover of Let the Bodies Hit the Floor, but they call it I Can Only Count to Four. I think that's what they call it. They were sick. Really good. Great bass player too. Everybody in the band was killer. Okay, let me take another sip of this. Still not through my protein drink yet. Okay. I have a question regarding a track doubler. This is from Florida Man. If the guitarist can barely do a single take, is printing the DI to a second guitar using a track doubler a viable option? I mean, not if you're. I mean, I wouldn't do it personally if I want my thing to sound professional. But if you're really stuck, then I guess that's an option. I'd rather just honestly, dude, just get even if you have to edit it and make them do 1,000 punch-ins. I would rather do that and have a real double track than doing a fake double track. I think I did a video on this recently on the channel as well. Those are okay if you're in a pinch for like a demo or something, but if you're looking to like put your music out and have it compared to like a real record, I would not do that personally. That's just me. Great question. Kelly Powers asks, do you use a limiter on the drum bus of MIDI drums? Sometimes, if it's a very, very subtle limiting, generally I will use a clipper or a tape saturator. But to me, when they're all working in a subtle fashion, they're all very similar. But that's my take sometimes. Okay. But I won't use more than it's one or the other, if that makes sense. But MIDI, it doesn't matter to me if it's MIDI drums or real drums. It's the same process. The only difference for me between MIDI drums and real drums is MIDI drums generally are so processed out of the gate that I don't have to mix them from scratch. I don't have to like cut out as much lower mid. I don't have to do as much high passing. I don't have to do as much of everything. I don't have to do as much compressing and all that stuff. Okay, so Rose Oakley asks, off topic, but do you ever watch Nuke's Top 5 or anything similar? Oh, on YouTube? If it's a YouTube channel, I think I know what you're talking about. And yes, right now I'm on a massive, you guys are gonna think I'm nuts. I'm on a massive Bigfoot kick. Not because I necessarily believe in Bigfoot, right? But dude, that 1967 Patterson footage is to this day, it's still amazing. Like if they faked that, somehow these two random cowboys from the middle of whatever, nowhere, with a $0 budget, put together an ape costume that they literally cannot do. Well, maybe they could do it today, but that were a better costume than what existed in Planet of the Apes a few years later and in 2001 Space Odyssey. How that's possible, I have no idea. It's really interesting if you look into it. So it's just, that's my newest geek thing those top 5 videos always talk about funny, like supernatural things like that. But yeah, that's my jam. When I watch YouTube, I mainly watch horror related content or business related content. I very rarely watch music related content unless I'm watching Rick Beato. I'm a huge Rick Beato person. I love his stuff. Okay, Minko, Suspiria, your opinions on original movie and the remake. Great question. Actually, I watched the remake with my friend Addison. I love the original, and the remake was interesting. Completely different than the original. Although I didn't really understand what was going on in the remake, and then Addison, if you remember, like broke it down. Like we found some website that explained it. It's crazy. It's interesting though. There was definitely some creepy scenes in the remake for sure. Okay, let me back up. Oh, okay. Olivier, if you have multiple sources for bass drum, like mic in, out, and sub, do you process them individually, or I process them individually and then maybe the subgroup? Let me tell you why. For example, with the sub, I might want to roll off a lot of the excess top that I don't want. If I have a mic in, I might do something like, by the way, I almost never do this in my own recordings, but if I were sent something to mix, this is what I generally would do. I would roll off more low end on the bottom, on the inside mic, and then let that low end exist from the sub kick. That's something that I've done. Yeah, that's what I would do. But if they're all in phase, but then again, if they're all in phase and they sound great together, then I'll process them together. I have no rules with that kind of thing. In general, though, I found in my experience, I do process them separately, and then I group them and do a little bit of something to them together. But I'm a minimalist. One microphone is all I need on a kick. I'm not a big fan of having 3 mics on a kick and all that kind of stuff. It does not, making it more complicated generally does not make it better, I've found. That's my opinion. Great question. Aaron asks, hey, Bobby, why is that when I'm mixing, I create a big mix that is super pleasing to the ear with no harsh frequencies? I think it sounds amazing, but then I'll A/B Pro mixes and they sound dark. Okay, great. That's a great question. You're not used to your monitors. That's what it is. And when we're mixing our music, we lose perspective. That's why I always recommend A/Bing regularly throughout the mix. But here's the thing. You're never going to make your mix sound like another mixer. If you notice, take Andy Wallace and compare him to Joey Sturgis and compare him to Jordan Valeria and compare him to Dan Corneff and compare him to Bob. Everybody sounds different. And that's because you really can't sound like someone else. That's the truth. But with that being said, I use a lot of reference mixes and I like to look at the big picture. I check the low end in general, the top end in general, the volume of the snare in general, and do it like that. A lot of times if you're listening on your own, it sounds great. Like you're only listening to your mix over and over for hours and hours and days and days and days and days and days. And then all of a sudden you hear like the Black Album or something. It's like, oh my God, it sounds so tiny. That's because the Black Album, that's because your mix is probably too low endy, right? That's why the car test works so well, because we know our cars, because we listen to, most of us do if we're driving. We've heard so much music in our cars. It's not because our car stereos are great. It's because we actually know the source. Yeah, that's the truth. So it's all perspective. There's no other reason. There's no other reason outside of perspective, if that makes sense. Okay, talking up a storm. I still haven't finished this protein drink yet. I'm going to talk slower for a second so I don't burn out my throat. Okay. Wow, it's already an hour and a half. All right, so I'm going to go for maybe a half hour more, but I'll keep rolling. As long as questions are rolling in, I'll keep rolling for a little while longer. Okay, so Death and Doom says, hi, what else professionals do with MIDI drums other than messing up with the velocity? Honestly, a lot of professionals use their own samples. That's what I've seen. That's it, man. There is people think like MIDI drum, like there's a huge difference between MIDI drums and real drums. The only difference is that MIDI drums are generally processed out of the gate and you have to know how to program them like a human. Right? Because that's the thing, a lot of us are guitar players and all we care about are guitars and we kind of half-ass the drums department, but listen to raw. This is why I always tell people, even if you only record your own music and you're only using MIDI drums, get your hands on a lot of different multi-tracks by real drummers and you will learn how real drummers actually play and it will teach you a lot. Mixing real drums will make you better at mixing fake drums and it will make you better at programming fake drums and all of the above. But yeah, it's a lot of little subtle things like that when it comes to programming MIDI. A lot of it mostly comes down to how you program the drums and if you understand drumming well. Good stuff. Now, actually, Mike, there's someone in the chat here, my man, Casse Ultra. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your band name, dude. He is a master at making MIDI drums sound real. Dude, he had me fooled. He's a Mixscript member and I'm blown away. He has some of the best sounding in the box productions I've ever heard in my life. Like to me, when I hear his mixes, I picture a band rocking it. He does a lot of I guess you can call it grindcore. Mike, if you're here, chime in. And he's a drummer, so he understands dynamics and he spends a lot of time programming his MIDI drums to sound real, and they do sound real. He had me fooled. When I heard his stuff, I thought it was like a band rocking out in a room together. It was all MIDI. Man, it sounds amazing, dude. So it all depends on how well you understand drums. Okay, we keep moving along. Nicholas, I'm glad you dig the channel. An awesome thumbnail I see, or an awesome icon. I see you're using Doom, one of my favorite games. Okay, so Ben Martin, is there a particular pickup setting or combination of pickups you prefer for tracking rhythm or lead? Dude, I am not a guitar geek. I don't really care about guitar stuff, if I'm being honest with you. A humbucker played by a tight rhythm guitar player is all I care about. I don't care if it's passive pickups, Seymour Duncan, bare knuckle, Real amps, amp sims, none of that means anything to me except for is the song good? Is the guitar player good? And is the guitar set up and actually intonated? That's all I care about. But to answer your question, obviously with heavier music, I prefer humbuckers. Great question. Chris Creon, for that fat wreck chord sound, would you have the bass drum set higher? Or I don't know what fat wreck chords is. But you're asking, would you have the bass drum set higher or lower than the kick drum? Bass drum and kick drum is the same drum. Sorry, dude. I think you might have to rewrite the question. I'm kind of confused. Dan says Bigfoot is real. Pablo, you seen they got new Loch Ness pics? I have not seen that. It's crazy, man. Like I believed all that stuff, obviously, when I was a kid. Like for example, the UFO thing. I was such a UFO nut when I was a kid. And then as I got older, I'm like, well, yeah. And now all of a sudden, all of this is coming out. And dude, here's what we got to realize. These are real ex-government officials. I mean, unless you're really into conspiracy stuff and now you think that this is a conspiracy, like I never thought I would ever in a million years see a hearing like what went down at the Capitol a few months ago. I felt like I was watching an episode of X-Files. So now I'm all interested in it again. I feel like I'm 8 years old again, but it's interesting. Serge asks, mic in or outside of the bass drum? I'm generally a mic inside person. Actually, I'm always a mic inside person. If I'm feeling saucy, I might place one on the outside, but it rarely gets used. Okay, Rose, can you explain the purpose of what a clipper really does? I get it shaves off the waveform. Is it shaves off transients or used for glue purposes? Both. Yes, it sounds good, but why am I really using it? Okay, so the way that I look at it is simple. It clips off the transient in a way that, to me, I'm gonna give you the non-scientific way of thinking of it. This is how my brain thinks of it. In a way that sounds more analog than a limiter, right? Like a brick wall limiter, it's a hard limit, right? So a clipper, it shaves off the transient in a way where the punch is not lost. But you have to be careful because a lot of people send me mixes that are over clipped and it can ruin your drum sound. So the way to do it is to do it subtly in stages, right? So a little bit of clipping on your snare if you're feeling like it, then a little bit of clipping on your drum bus. I don't use clipping on the master. I know some people are fans of doing that. I'm not. I mainly only use clipping on the drum submix. That's how I like to do it. But there are people that use it on the snare submix. You're mainly doing it for the snare and sometimes the toms anyway, to kind of keep the drums in check so that you can bring your overall mix up. But that's how I think of clipping. It's a great tool. But sometimes, for me, in this particular song, it's the only place for me, but it's just a dream to me. I'm not using a clipper per se. I'm using the PSP Micro Warmer, which is more like a tape saturator, but it kind of acts like a clipper, but it's not like a limiter to me, right? So hopefully that makes sense. A limiter is a lot more aggressive and a lot more brick wall-y sounding, where it really will just destroy your transients. Okay. Serge says it's all about Nessie. Dude, that'd be sick if Nessie were real. I have my doubts though. Maybe. I don't know. How do you, Lost Guy says, how do you steal a Tesla and where to sell the parts? I don't own a Tesla, so I miss, it sounds funny, but I cannot relate. Hey, Bobby, could you name a handful of 21st century albums that you feel changed the game, set new standards, have become common mix references? I mean, I'm the worst person in the world to ask because I completely did not get the whole gent thing personally. I love Meshuggah. I was a huge fan of Destroy, Erase, Improve and Chaos Fear and even a little bit of Catch 33. And then I kind of fell off after that. Pretty much once I started producing metal, I kind of stopped listening to metal, if I'm being completely honest with you. I'm more of an old school person, believe it or not. But with that being said, God, I mean, I guess Joey Sturgis had a huge impact on like the metalcore scene. Didn't he do Asking Alexandria? He did like all that kind of stuff. But I was already too old at that point to like, I didn't know. I mean, like I knew kids liked it, but I grew up in the 90s. So for me, it was all about Pantera. I'm a huge fan of Carcass, that band Carcass. Obviously I grew up on Metallica and things like that. But yeah, I wish I can give you a more interesting answer than that. I'm pretty terrible at that kind of stuff, but great question. All right. Jigsaw. Hey, man, how much of mixing knowledge is enough to mix a competent sounding demo? Dude, I mean, if you're doing in the box stuff, I mean, if your song is good and you're dealing with decent musicians, you can have a great sounding demo. You don't even have to know how to mix, if I'm being completely honest with you. Stuff like Easy Drummer, Get Good Drums, what is that one? Superior Drummer, and like, I don't know, Gojira's plugin or whatever, you will have a good sounding demo. Way better than anything we could have dreamed about 30 years ago. The problem is I get this question a lot. I'm not referencing you, but I'll get people saying, yo, rate my mix. And it's literally like 2 riffs, no bass, no guitar, and like Easy Drummer. And I'm like, okay, but I would need to hear the song if I'm going to rate your mix. Because to me, a mix is a whole song, whether it's instrumental or, a song with vocals. It's how everything is arranged and that kind of that. So pretty much I'm just saying this. If you have a song that's well arranged, good musicianship, decent musicianship, and you own these, perfect example, my friend Addison is a great songwriter. So he's been showing me some of his demos and they're killer. They literally sound better than my early recordings, right? And like, I don't think he considers himself a mix engineer. It's just that he's a good musician and understands arrangement and understands how songs are put together. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's using Easy Drummer and I don't know, Gojira maybe? The Gojira plugin. And it sounds amazing. So that's my take on that. So yeah, good sounding demos is not hard to do these days. There's a lot of info for beginner mixing engineers and I don't really know where's the point where you stop and what you have and move on, because that's always a new level you can. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're only interested in mixing demos, then I would just concentrate on making good music and your demos are going to sound great. Now, if you want to actually mix your album or your release, different story. Then you need to take it seriously. You have to practice, get your hands on multiple sets of multi-tracks, join like a monthly community. I'm not saying you have to join mine, join something like Nail the Mix or like what I'm doing, so you can actually get real world experience. That's the only way to get good at this stuff, in my opinion. And obviously do your research, learn from other producers that share their techniques and all that kind of stuff. But you have to put the time in. It's like playing guitar. It's the same. It's literally almost exactly like playing guitar or playing drums. You have to put your reps in. So good question. Seventh String Heaven, cool name. I seem to really struggle adding delay to lead guitar. Happy with the dry tone, sounds plastic when I add delay in DAW. Make sure your send is 100% wet. Delay should just be in the back. I mean, this is my opinion. It should be in the background and it shouldn't make or break your tone. So maybe you're using a delay that has modulation or something and turn the modulation off. Because all a delay is actually doing is delaying the signal and repeating it. It's not doing anything outside of that. Maybe it might be filtered in the top end and low end or something, but maybe you're using a delay that's overly colored. Use a generic bland delay. Like I'm a huge fan of the Waves Super Tap because it's literally just a delay. It does not, you can add modulation, which I actually have a little bit on right now. But yeah, that's my take on that. You might be using something fancier than what you think. Okay, so a little more time here. So Chris Crean says, no effects, Lagwagon, Propaganda, SoCal early 90s pop punk, bass guitar set lower on higher than kick drum. Bass guitar set lower or higher than kick drum? Okay, dude, I think I know what you mean. So you're asking what should be sitting in the subs. I've always been a fan of having my kick drum. Let me show you in this mix, actually. I do this with all genres. It doesn't matter. This is just me. And this is pretty much the most common way of doing it. So my kick drum here is not rolled off, right? But I am rolling off low end on my drum submix. So the kick drum is actually being rolled off at 40 hertz, okay? That is the lowest instrument in this mix. There's nothing existing below 40 hertz except for maybe a sub drop if that kicks in, but my bass guitar is sitting slightly above that. The bass guitar is rolled off at 60 hertz. So in a way, the kick is on its own occupying below 60 hertz. I think of it as a layered cake or a sandwich. Kick drum, bass guitar, rhythm guitars, snare, and then all the other stuff above it, right? And then obviously the super duper top end would be your cymbals. And then if I have a super bright synth or a super bright guitar, I'm gonna roll off that high end to make room up there. But generally the kick drum is below the bass guitar, if that makes sense. Great question. Even, it doesn't matter if I'm doing jazz, if I'm doing SoCal punk, if I'm doing indie rock, that's how I always do it. I know there's maybe some other people that flip it around, but in my experience, that's pretty rare. Good question. Have a good night, Dan. Thank you for hanging out. Okay, cool. So let's see. Okay, so Death and Doom. I'm quite obsessed with Be Quiet and Drive 2. I am pursuing that guitar tone. Do you have any tips for this? I'm using the THU amp sim with an Ibanez guitar with a little bit of saturation on the guitar bus. I don't know what Stefan used on that record. I think he used a Marshall, if I'm not mistaken, on that Deftones record. I think he was still using Marshalls back then. I don't know what the THU amp is. So I would recommend, if you really want that tone or something similar, get some Marshall-esque JCM 900, 800 kind of thing, amp sim that's decent, and then find the right impulse response that sounds decent. You can use if you go to any of my videos on amp sims, you can get my free amp sim IR. That should have you covered, and then just play tight, and you will have a tone that's somewhat close to that album. Because there's nothing special going on in that album. It's just good production, good songwriting, good playing, basic panning. It's nothing earth-shattering. It's just well recorded. So, I can't tell you, okay, use this EQ trick and you're going to have the Deftones guitar tone. There is no EQ trick. It's just getting that tone right in the first place. And I'm 90% sure he was using a Marshall on that record. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, anybody who's a Deftones fan, but I think Stephen Carpenter was all about Marshall back in the day. Because definitely on White Pony, that sounds like a Marshall to me. Yeah, the went and went, that's Marshall-esque in my head. Okay, a few more questions. Oldie Winkle. Do you use headphones when mixing, and can you even get a professional result? Oh, dude, you can totally mix on headphones. Here's the secret to all of this stuff. Just, if you're using, I'm in a room that's untreated. This room is not treated. Not treated at all. I've mixed so much in this room over this past year, and it was hard at first because I wasn't used to it because I just moved down here, and now I'm used to it. Not a great sounding room, not treated, but I'm used to, and I'm using IK Multimedia micro monitors, and I can mix on them. Headphones are the same thing. If you're used to whatever you're using, as long as you're used to them, you can get great results. I think, I could be mistaken, I think Jordan from Hardcore Music Studio did a video on this, I think, on like mixing with earbuds. I didn't watch it. Maybe I'm making it up, but I'm pretty sure I saw a thumbnail involved with that topic. I bet you that dude mixed a killer sounding record. He could do it anywhere. As long as he adapts to what he's listening to, you're good. Yes, you can mix with headphones. There are people that do it. And actually it used to be very, very looked down upon back in the day by like gatekeepers and stuff. But dude, the old days are over. The rules are gone. You can do it. You can mix great records in a friggin' laundry room if you had to. As long as you know the laundry room, as long as you're used to that, the way that the room sounds, like this room is not good sounding at all, but I'm used to it. I've been planning on putting up basic treatment to kind of cut down on the echo for the last year and a half, and I just haven't gotten around to it. And honestly, it hasn't stopped me. So, and this same thing with headphones. As long as you listen to a lot of music with those headphones and do A/B testing, you'll be good. Great question. Okay, let's see. No problem, Chris. So let's talk about Reaper. Are you making your living doing creative things, or do you have a day job? If so, what's the day job? I run a kidney clinic. Dude, you have a real adult job. I do not. I've been producing for full time since I guess I got out of college. So 2008. I used to supplement my income with teaching guitar, and I had some amazing students, some really good ones. But I just don't have time to teach anymore because I got so busy with producing. And then once, the live sound thing came around, forget about it. So I do this full time. Yeah, that's what I do. I do not have an adult job. Fortunately and unfortunately, the good thing is it's awesome and I get to do music 24/7. The bad thing is that I have no set schedule and it could be kind of get out of hand if I'm not really diligent with my schedule. So great question, Mike. Anthony says, hey, Bobby, I'm looking for good reference songs / band for modern punk rock. Do you have any suggestions? I don't know, man. I don't listen to modern punk rock. So I think it's simple. Find a mix you like by a modern punk rock band. And if you like it, use it as your reference mix. It's as simple as that. Yeah, I wish I could point you in the right direction, but I literally don't know one modern punk band if I'm being honest, but that's my take. Nelnick. I use Guitar Rig Marshall, Bobby, then Redwire's Marshall IR. Are there any good? I have no idea, dude. I don't use Guitar Rig. I haven't used Guitar Rig since 2008. I'm sure it's fine. Almost all of these plugins are good. I don't know if those IRs are good. I've noticed a lot of IRs are pretty terrible, if I'm being completely honest with you, and that's why I use my own. You could download mine. Just go to any of my videos related to amp sims and you can find it. It's completely free. You could download it and then give it a shot. Maybe you'll like it. I like my IRs because they're very balanced and not hyped and not phasey and weird sounding. So that's just me. Okay, sleepless sheep insane. sheep insane. Hey man, hope you're doing good. Quick question: how do you use stereo imaging on heavy metal music at mixing and mastering stage? I do not use stereo wideners at all. The only thing I do is hard pan. If you have to use this is my opinion, and I know other producers share a similar opinion. Not to say that it's wrong, but if you have to make up for a lackluster width, like if your mix doesn't sound wide by the mastering stage, then your mix there's something wrong. So I don't use stereo width plugins. And I never have. I mean, I used to when I first started, and then I kind of realized that there was always something off. It actually would make my mixes sound smaller. It would sound bigger in the moment, but then by the time I learned to just not use them. And I found that I'm not alone. A lot of other producers are kind of similar in that department. And Addison, when we mastered the Ire, I don't know if you're still here, but I'll talk to you as if you're here. Addison, when we went to Nathan James to master your album, I don't think he was using stereo widening either, from what I remember. I remember being pretty blown away by that. I remember I worked with a mastering engineer a couple times, this guy, Nathan James, who's phenomenal, at a place called the Vault Mastering. And that's where I learned like how little they do if your mix is decent. Like they don't do anything crazy, right? Like mastering is not some crazy process. If you have a good mix, you shouldn't have to do a whole lot. When you go to a mastering engineer, generally you're paying for a second set of ears. And obviously if your mix has issues, they fix the issues as well as best as they can. I prefer to mainly use a mastering engineer these days if I'm doing vinyl. If it's a vinyl release, I don't want to get involved with that. I'll have the band outsource the vinyl master to a mastering engineer because it can be complicated. They sometimes have to do weird stuff to the low end. But it depends. Good question. See, this is the kind of stuff I love. DJ Victor's asking a great question. What's the oldest plugin you still use today? Oh, great question. I'm a huge fan of the Metric Halo channel strip. Dude, this plugin is from 1998, and it's still awesome. I also love all of the old classic wave stuff, the L1, the Renaissance EQ. I don't use the only newer plugins I really use. I like Easy Bass for demos. That's kind of new. Dude. Jordan of Hardcore Music Studio just put out a gate that is literally the most amazing gate I have ever used in my entire life. I'm actually going to do a video on it. I don't know how they did it. It somehow, I guess, maybe uses look ahead, and it is insane. That I will be using. Okay, that's a new plugin. But outside of that, yeah, I use old stuff. I mean, I'm comfortable with it. It's more about just knowing the tools that you're using. People make fun of me all the time, but it's like, okay, I mean, a lot of these plugin companies are just repackaging the same crap over and over and over again, except for, there are exceptions, obviously, like the one I just mentioned. But it's going to take something really amazing to have me switch, if I'm being honest. It's got to either save me time or it's got to save me money or one of those two. For example, the new gate plugin by Black Salt Audio is going to save me time. So I'm using it. If it saves me time, I'm using it. But if it's literally another compressor that sounds like my compressor, why am I switching to it? That's my take. Okay. A lot of good questions here. I love it. Death and Doom. THU is amplitude-ish plugin with lots of different amps, cabs, and all that stuff. Basically, amplitude. Dude, if it has a million options, I'm probably not going to use it, if I'm being honest. I just cannot. I use a 5150 kind of tone, or a Marshall tone, or a clean tone. That's it. If I have too many options, my brain starts to distract me too much. And then my guitar geek brain kicks in and I get nothing done. So that's why you see me using, just like I mentioned the plugins before, I'm the same way with amp sims. I've never used THU. I'm sure it's amazing. But if there are a million cabs and stuff in it, I'm probably not going to use it if I'm being honest. But if you like it, that's all that matters. Okay, Roman. Hey dude, have you ever dealt with procrastination issues in your creative work? I'm dealing with it right now, actually. Like not finishing the projects and such. Well, if I have a deposit from a customer and the project's due, I'm getting it done. If it's my own music, generally I procrastinate. If so, any tips on how to tame that thing? Thanks. Yeah, well, I've talked a little bit about this on the channel. Put a date on your calendar, announce it to your friends and family, make it public, and hold yourself accountable, and get it done. That's the number one difference between pros and amateurs. Pros get things done whether they feel like it or not, and amateurs get things done when they feel like it, and that's generally why they don't get things done. And I know because I'm both. All right, I do both. Like, I do things for fun, and I do things for other people, and the things I do for other people always get done because I'm accountable. You know, I don't like to disappoint people. I don't like to have that hanging over my head. So yeah, obviously if you're recording your own music, you're going to want to announce it somewhere, and then you will feel like you're held accountable to deliver on your promise. So great question. Okay, guys, a couple more questions and we will call it a night. It has been a blast. Again, if you need help with your mixes and you need feedback, you could join my Frightbox Mix Crypt. It is open only for the next 24 hours. There is a link in this video's description. We mix a brand new song every month. You will have direct access to the entire back catalog of masterclasses, coaching call replays. Right now, we're currently at 25 songs. So the second you join, you have access to 25 songs, which is insane. We do mix reviews of all members' mixes once a month. We also have a coaching call kind of like this. It's a little more involved and a little more intimate, where I answer questions and help people out with if they're starting a studio, whatever. It doesn't matter if you're working on your own music or you're looking to work with other bands. We cover it all. So there you go. Again, the Mix Crypt is only open for the next 24 hours, and I only open it for a few days out of the entire year. There's a link in this video's description. If you're interested, check it out. Okay, let me answer these last few questions. Neo Ashita Music. Do you ever find yourself mixing other genres than metal? I mainly, dude, to be honest with you, I love listening to all different genres of music. I listen to a lot of jazz. I listen to 80s pop kind of stuff all the time. But as far as like what my passion is, I mainly do, as long as there are drums, guitars, and distorted guitars and vocals, I'll do it, right? And good songs. I am not a fan of songs that are 20 minutes long with 5 million riffs. Not a fan. You know, like, I know there are a lot of people that like that stuff, but I'm not a fan of crazy technical music. I'm just going to say that. So those are my criteria. It's pretty vague. So I'll do a hardcore band. I'll do an indie rock band. As long as there are drums, guitars, bass, and vocals, that's my specialty. You know, like last year we did a really good band live, but this is live. It's a little different. Live recording at the studio. They're called Honey Wild, local band in my area. Dude, it was amazing. I guess you can call them, I don't know, R&B? I don't know if you would call them that. They had a horn section, amazing drummer, great vocalist. She played keys, 2 sick guitar players, amazing bass player. I love that stuff as well. But again, there's drums. There's, you know, the things I don't do, I don't touch hip hop. I'm just not a fan. I like 90s hip hop. I'm not a fan of modern hip hops. I've tried getting into that, and it's like nails on a chalkboard. I don't like doing it. What else? Yeah. So as long as there are drums, shorter songs that actually have choruses, and guitars, bass, and drums, I will do it. And that's my jam. So anything outside of that, I really have no interest in doing, if I'm being honest. Great question. All right, guys, if there are any last minute questions, you could ask now. I think 2 hours is a nice run. I'm going to finish the rest of this protein drink in case any other questions roll in. If not, we'll call it a night. It's been a blast. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. And stay tuned to the channel. I have a lot of unique new style content coming out on the channel. The channel's going to remain the same. It's still going to be metal production, still going to be rock production, but I'm doing a slight pivot, actually. I've had ideas for many different things, and I'm finally taking action on those things. So give me 1 second. Let me just take a sip here. Let's talk about Reapers. Unrelated question, cats or dogs? I love both. I grew up with both cats and dogs. My parents, we had cats, but I always grew up around dogs. My uncle had dogs. My girlfriend's parents have had 2 dogs. Now they have 1 dog, but we watched their dog. I love both. I love both, man. I can't pick. But I gotta say this, when it comes to cats, I like cool cats that like actually will hang out and not hide all the time. So I'll just say that. But I love both. I can't pick one or the other. Great question. Jonathan, thank you for hanging out. DJ, thank you for hanging out. And you're asking, do you remember the first song you ever heard that blew you away sound-wise? Yeah, and I was very little. The first song I ever fell in love with was, I think, in 1988. I was a little kid, and even then, I loved music right away. The George Harrison, what is it, in the Wilderberries? I Got My Mind Set on You, but it's a George Harrison song. Dude, to this day, I love that production, and it's just such a great song. That's probably the first one that really kind of took me over. And then I obviously grew up on Nirvana, Kiss, Van Halen's a huge one for me. Then I got into heavier stuff like Metallica, Pantera, which progressed into Morbid Angel, a little bit of Cannibal Corpse, and it's just kind of... Then when I was a teenager, I got really into jazz. So I got really into Mike Stern, Wes Montgomery, Miles Davis, and all that stuff. So I'm all over the place, but that's my jam. Good question. Okay, last couple questions here. Thank you, Jose. Glad you've been digging the videos. Thank you, Alex, for hanging out. Let's talk about Reaper. That's a good question. I don't know what would really be math rock, but I think emo, Midwest emo. I like a little, I don't know if this even counts. I know this isn't Midwest, but I like Thursday. I don't know if that's really emo. I actually love My Chemical Romance. I think a lot of metalheads will talk smack about My Chemical Romance. Go play their songs and get back to me. When I used to teach guitar, I'd have kids back when My Chem was really big bring in their stuff, and I'm like, this is actually kind of hard to play, like more technical than you would think. I love My Chemical Romance. What else? Kill Switch and all that stuff. I kind of missed the boat, if I'm being honest. I really love a band called, my friend is in a band called Thank You Scientist. I think they're phenomenal. I'm not really normally into progressive kind of stuff, but I do love Thank You Scientist. Yeah, that's it. I don't know. Math rock, I don't know much. I'm not I guess I never really listened to a lot of math rock, but I'm sure it's cool. There's probably stuff I have to catch up on. Great question though, man. Death and Boom says, love the stream. Hope I can join the next one. And my last question is, when you use MIDI drums in a mix, you bounce the MIDI tracks to real files or just use the MIDI itself and mix inside? No, I always bounce them down to real files. I want to get my amp sims and MIDI drums to be as close as far as workflow to real drums and real amps as possible. Here's something to keep in mind. If you have MIDI drums, every time that snare is being triggered, it's randomly picking a sample. So this is the way I think it works, and it's proven to kind of be this way in my own workflow. When you hit your space bar, your mix is going to technically sound slightly different each time. I don't like that. I'm way too OCD for that. I want my mix to be exactly the same. When you're working on real music, real like these are real drums, right? So if I play this, every time I hit this, that is the exact same sound. With MIDI, it's triggering a random sample to sound realistic, and that means that snare hit is going to sound slightly different each time. So I want to print that down to audio. I know what I have to work with, and if I want to add another sample in place, then I'll swap it out with Slate Trigger or something like that. But you have to make sure your performances are done. You have to unblur the lines between, writing, pre-production, and mixing. When I get to this point, the song is done, dude. Like completely done. I'm not tweaking any more stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of us home studio people, we have trouble with that because we're always tweaking stuff, changing stuff to the point where nothing gets done. So you have to kind of develop that mindset. To answer your question, great question. Tiny moving parts, exactly. Okay. Thank you guys. DJ, thank you for hanging out. Let's talk about Reaper. Thank you for hanging out. Addison, James, Dan, everyone, thank you for hanging out. Alex, thank you for hanging out. I will be seeing everyone on the channel real soon. And until next time, happy mixing. Later, everyone. Have a good night and a nice weekend. Later.